If ever there was a time to start rolling back and realizing that the military is not the right instrument, President Trump seems inclined to use it yet again, this time potentially in Iran. For some people that are close to the president, it's a pretty simple situation. This is not that complicated. This regime has to go at this point. There's no deal. There's no agreement. President Obama tried that path. We led to continue their nuclear program. President Biden tried to do the same thing. This is not a regime that could be negotiated with. This is a regime that is going to have to be forced from power by the Iranian people. And the United States can provide support for that. Look, we're on a dangerous road that leads from failure to failure to failure, going all the way back to 1965. We came off the gold standard primarily because we were financially destroyed as a result of spending on the Vietnam War on one hand and the Great Society at home. LBJ wanted to do both when you could only do one at a time. That was the reason for going off the gold standard. So then you were in a position that you no longer had to go to the American people and say, well, we want to go intervene in country X or country Y, change its government, transform it into another gleaming example of liberal democracy. So we're going to raise your taxes. There's no reason to raise taxes. You hit the button and you create the money. So we have been creating wealth that isn't real for decades. All of this is going to come to an end. And that's really Peter Schiff's message. I think Griffin, if you listen to him carefully, was in implying the same thing. Nobody is going to stand up and admit to this. Larry Fink is part of the cabal that is driving policy. He has to be taken very seriously right now in this White House, as he's one of the individuals that supported Donald Trump. And he's not alone. You could go down the list of billionaires, and these people want certain things. And right now, Donald Trump is expected to deliver on a promise that he made, and that is that he would eventually attack and destroy Iran. Now, what do you do when you're dealing with a nation the size of Western Europe that has over 90 million people in it? I think the latest number was 93 million. Well, you destroy it economically. We've done that. We've ruined the currency. They're still holding together, which is miraculous in many respects, but they're also being helped and supported now dramatically by China and Russia, not just with military matters and military equipment and technology, but in other ways. And increasingly, people in the region are saying, we don't want to see Iran destroyed, but what else can you do to Iran? You can't invade it and occupy it. That's beyond our ability. We don't have that many forces to do something like that. It would take millions and millions of troops for such an operation. We're not going to raise those. So what are we going to do? We're going to hurl explosives at it. We're not only going to try to kill the leadership as we have in the past, but we're going to destroy the infrastructure. Whatever manufacturing base exists, we're going to kill it. Whatever infrastructure is there that supports the population, we're going to destroy it. If we can force a deprivation on the population in terms of water and food, that's what we're going to do. Iran must be destroyed. That is Mr. Netanyahu's demand. And the billionaires that sponsored Donald Trump for the presidency are listening to Netanyahu. And as a result, Mr. Trump is listening to Mr. Netanyahu. That's where we're headed. So we're not trying to achieve some sophisticated goal that will lead to an end state where everybody lives with each other in the future. Far from it. This is a war of ruthless destruction of Iran. That's all it is. And that's what we're going to do. And at the end of it, we're going to regret it for all the reasons that you and others have already pointed out. It's not just the oil and natural gas that come out of there. It becomes, I guess, liquefied gas when it moves, but that comes out of the Persian Gulf. We know that China imports at least 30+% of the oil that comes out of the Gulf and almost 90% of their own needs. This is a huge chunk. That's going to have an impact. There's no doubt about it. And I don't know that President Trump is unaware. I just think that President Trump is in a box, and his rhetoric has been so belligerent and so threatening, and his demands are consistent with Israeli talking points, which are unyielding and demand an uncompromising outcome. And I don't see much evidence that the Iranians are going to surrender. So he's saying what you're going to witness is 12 times worse than anything you've ever seen. I think that's where we're headed, and it's not going to be good for us. I don't think it's going to be good for the world. And you know, I think this is I think I perceive anyway that the president, or at least some of his advisors, his senior advisors, believe the rhetoric, which is we can do whatever we want. Look what happened in Venezuela. We did exactly what we wanted. Look what we did in Iraq and Iran last year. Look what we did in Nigeria, etc. We can do whatever we want. No one's going to do anything. President Trump was asked about a week ago, 10 days ago, Iran says that they're going to retaliate if you strike this time. And he says, well, that's what they said the first time, and they didn't do it. And then now here, this is, I think this is from earlier today. This is the foreign minister, Iraqi, says, our brave forces are prepared with their fingers on the trigger to immediately and powerfully respond to any aggression against our beloved country. And he goes on to say that, you know, we're willing to have a negotiated deal, but only if it's mutually beneficial. So basically saying that whatever you're offering is not even on the table because you're not offering anything mutually beneficial. Meanwhile, we have the Wall Street Journal out this morning that said, by the way, Iran has been battered, but they are still able to mount a deadly response. And you see they have 2,000 mid-range ballistic missiles of apparently very capable models that can penetrate air defenses both in the U.S. and Iran, Israel. They have strategic stockpiles of short-range missiles capable of hitting U.S. forces. There, anti-ship missiles as well as cruise missiles. In other words, they have plenty of power that if pushed, they can strike back. So if now, let's just look at it militarily for the moment. If President Trump, whether he's boxed in or not, whether he gives in to the pressure or not, does give the order here and he thinks he's going to do something safe, but instead of playing it safe on the other side, Iran finally says, I've had enough. And they actually start firing and killing Americans, blowing up ships, bases, and stuff in the region. What does Trump have on his hand then? I think he will alienate most of the world. We're already on a path of division. You're going to have increasingly this thing called BRICS on one side. I think it will eventually have as many as 100 members. People are going to migrate to it to get out from underneath our financial system so that they're not bullied by us. Increasingly, nobody wants the dollar. They're dumping dollars and they don't want to do business in dollars. Now, that will not go away immediately, but the trend lines are unambiguous and I don't think they're going to change. And then on the other side, you have us, probably the West Europeans, and potentially a few others. I don't know where they'll be. Maybe in Latin America, and that's the alternative system. It's effectively the old system that we dominate and continue to maintain. So the world will split into two financial halves. That has interesting implications for economic development and future productivity down the line. I can't even begin to imagine all those implications, but I think that's where we're headed. And I think what this does is simply hasten or accelerate that process of division because Iran is more than the canary in the coal mine. The canary in the coal mine was the 1922 decision by the Russians to intervene in Ukraine. And most of the world recognized that they had to do that to protect themselves as well as the Russians on the ground in Ukraine. We're the ones who keep objecting to that, saying this was completely unprovoked nonsense. It's just nobody buys that outside the United States, or almost nobody does. That's an Anglo-American or Israeli narrative. So you're going to get this split, and I think that the Iranian experience against us is going to really sour the rest of the world on us. And I think we'll see the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction as a result. I mean, why would you want to end up in a position like the Iranians where you have no nuclear weapon and you risk the very high probability that the Israelis will use one against you? Because if the Iranians do not exercise any restraint, if they decide that's it, we have no incentive. Now, to back down or to back off, this is a do or die proposition. What's to stop the Israelis from delivering a nuclear strike against the Iranians? And if that happens, what do? What do the Russians do? What do the Chinese do? What do the Pakistanis do? Or Pakistan, too. And we now have this Pakistani-Saudi-Turkish alliance. It's very, very serious. I mean, the Turks, they're the outliers, but the Turks are very concerned about what happens to Iran. They may have their differences with the Shiites in Iran, but they don't want to see Iran destroyed. Their view is if you destroy Iran, that's going to have terrible, terrible blast effects on everybody else. Everybody in the region is going to be in the receipt of millions of refugees, and our own societies will be at risk. So the Turks are working with the Iranians. You know about the LA last time, I think we talked about the Kurdish intervention and how that was reported to the Iranians and so forth, that this were beyond just a regional conflict over a piece of ground or some resources. This is now an existential moment for Iran, and I think for everybody in the Middle East. And let me ask you pointedly, I want to narrow down a little bit on the United States, because I have real worries about what President Trump may be faced with. So I think he is of the opinion right now that he can launch a few missiles and do so safely, and there won't be a response. But if it doesn't happen, if Iran does say one strike anywhere equals we're going all in on you, if that happens, what can President Trump do? Because if Iran starts hitting bases at Al Udeid in Qatar or in Bahrain, some of these hits some of our ships, he can't just stop. He can't just back down, even though that would be the wise thing to do. But the minute that you have smoldering wreckages of Americans and body bags, you know, coming and do Air Force Base exchanges and all that kind of stuff, there will be an outcry to go back and do more. But we can't do more. Well, I mean, we can't invade the place, as you said a second ago. I mean, we physically don't have the capacity, much less the political will. What then does that leave Trump in the event that Americans get killed in a retaliation? What are his options next? Based upon what I've seen from him and his administration to this point, if you look at the tariffs, he'll double down. He'll reinforce failure. Well, the last 300 or 400 missile strikes haven't done the job. I want another 500 missile strikes. If they don't do the job, then we'll have to have more missile strikes. The problem is I think we have about 2 weeks worth of missiles. Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. In every category, we don't have to go through the separate categories. And this goes back to something else that I've said repeatedly to people. They all look at me and say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Remember, we're in aerospace and maritime power. Wherever we go, our presence there is temporary. It's not permanent. In other words, we don't live there. Our population doesn't live there. Now, what does that mean? That means that if you fight a war against a continental power, and that includes Iran or Russia or China or others that live on the Eurasian continent, they have the advantage in many respects of almost limitless depth strategically. In other words, not only in size, but in the numbers of things that they can produce and hurl at you. So I think we're at risk of running out of missiles and capabilities sooner than the Iranians will. Now, that doesn't mean the Iranians will walk away as major winners in this contest. I don't think there will be any winners in this contest, least of all us, because I think the consequences here at home economically will be profound. So then we come to your question, which is, we started this war contrary to what anybody will tell the American public, and I'm sure Mr. Pompeo will be out there as his masters dictate that he go out and say that we were attacked by the evil Iranians, that Iran is the menace to the world, and we have to finish the job. The question is, will Americans buy that argument? I'm skeptical. I think right now Americans are very, very upset and discontented with the failure to make the progress here at home that President Trump wants to make. I mean, I'm somebody, and you know this, Dan, I support what the president wants to domestically. I don't support, the lack of a strategy. I'm disappointed that it hasn't been well organized and well executed. But that's part of the problem with doing things here at home, is you're also doing things overseas. It's back to the LBJ problem. President Trump early on needed to make a choice. Where do I want to go? And what we have to say as well, President Trump, the people that voted for you did not vote for a war with Iran. They didn't vote for a war in Ukraine. They didn't vote for a war with Venezuela. That's not their interest. They're voting for the United States. They want the rule of law and order here in the United States desperately. They do want the millions of aliens that are in the country identified and packed up and moved out of the country. They really do. I mean, you could look at all the polling. They've favored this for a long time. How you do it is another matter. I don't think we've thought that through very much. But you can't do those things at home. You want to repatriate manufacturing, so you launch a tariff war, right? You alienate everyone everywhere, and then you act as though we have every right to do this because everybody owes us something. The world doesn't feel that way, telling them that they all owe us something. I listened to President Trump say, well, we won the Second World War. Yeah, we were on the winning side, Mr. President. We didn't win it alone, and we were very anxious to get it over with as quickly as possible and get back to business, which is what we did ultimately. And we ought to remember that. But telling all these people your gratitude is insufficient for all that we've done for you, that's a waste of time. That may appeal to some people in the MAGA base, but it's just nonsense. Forget it. How do you get him to say, I want to rethink what I'm doing now. Maybe this isn't such a good idea. But he's got all of these billionaires that have put him in the driver's seat. How does he turn to them and say, thanks, but can't do it? If he does that, how long will he last? What will they do? And we know what they will do. They will just turn their money entirely in the other direction. Because what happened under Biden, the same billionaires that were driving the Biden administration to war on Ukraine and backing Netanyahu in the Middle East, are the same people that put Trump into office. So they'll just turn their efforts in support of somebody else in the effort to punish Trump. The problem is our country is going to be in a lot of trouble by then. And I'm not sure that they can expect to have the same level of influence in the future that they've had to this point, especially since they're pushing us over the cliff, right? Yeah. And if we have a 1789 moment like you were talking about before, which is my great fear, nobody's going to be safe, not even those guys. Their money won't help them out at that time. And then God help us all if we get to that point. We just have to hope that the pain can be slow enough and coming in so it's not a collapse moment, but a slow descent moment to where when the pain gets enough that maybe we can start making some changes before the worst of the outcomes occur. Because if we don't, I fear that they could get really ugly indeed, even at home. Well, of course, we've done everything we possibly could since 2008 to postpone a reckoning. Remember, if you go back to 2007, 2008, when President Obama came in, suddenly everyone that was in trouble financially all over the United States and in New York City and Washington, so forth, they were all compensated with $1 for every dollar lost. And I remember Sheila Bair, who said, well, why not pay them 10 cents on the dollar? These people should be punished for their mismanagement, their recklessness, even criminal behavior. And no. And Paulson and his friends at Goldman Sachs bailed everybody out. Okay, so now we've bailed everybody out. And this time around, there won't be any bailouts. That's pretty clear. It is. And that's why the best thing President Trump could do is whatever pain that he could genuinely face and legitimately face from these financial backers if he turns and doesn't do what they want. I don't deminimize that because that's real, but that is nothing compared to what's going to happen if he listens to them, continues on down these paths, especially not into the Russia-Ukraine war and starting an Iranian war. It could have consequences that nobody could control with or without the backing. And that's the thing I worry about. Yeah, well, it's sort of like World War I, did the Tsar have to mobilize and declare war on Germany and Austria-Hungary? No, you didn't. And there were many people that said, forget it. We don't want to be part of this destructive war. Our economy is actually beginning to grow finally. We're producing, steel at number 4 or 5 in the world. Living standards can come up. The population is happy. Let's not go to war. But he did, is very sad and tragic for that matter. There's music. The Austrian command, Austrian Emperor Franz Josef, the Hungarians delayed their support for war for 2 weeks, and they had to practically bribe the the Hungarians to join the war effort. Disaster. That was a war that should not have been fought. It wasn't necessary, but everybody was dragged into it. And the British, they sat out there and had never been part of this continental mess, certainly really not since Napoleon. And they decided to jump on board, even though they all admitted, well, there's no real interest at stake here. And they know German-speak-aching soldier had fired at an English SP-speak-aching soldier at that point in over 200 years. But people do stupid things. That's why I say I'm worried that if this progresses and we don't get the results that President Trump is being told they can get, we don't know what he's being told. Yeah, that's a big problem. It is. But if the results don't show up the way he expects them to, he's predisposed to double down. And we've seen that especially with air power over the last 80 years. Well, if the 500,000 tons didn't work, 1,000,000 tons may work. And you keep it up and you declare victory this time around. I don't know. Yeah, it's a big unknown, and I guess we're all going to find out together because it's hard for me to imagine. I hope that it does, but it's hard for me to imagine that he won't launch a strike here. I think he's boxed himself in, but we'll just have to wait and see and then call the shots when balls and strikes when they happen. Yep. Thanks, Dan. Thanks very much for coming on today, Doug, and providing this clarity on this. We don't like some of these answers, but this is stuff that we all need to know. So we need to understand what we're facing. We are unintimidated, uncompromised to bring you that truth. And we're going to have it just like we did on this show here. We ask you to share this, by the way. Share with others who some people only like to get their stuff with a podcast. Send them the podcast. We're on podcast there. Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podcast Addict, Daniel Davis, Deep Dive. You'll find us there. Send this out to them. The written word on Substack. We have that here, and obviously this one too. Like and subscribe if you haven't. That helps more than you think. Get the word out. Folks, don't let this catch people by surprise. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Music.